Hello, people of the internet, my name is Atlas, and for a long time now, the fandom has been overcome by discussions of what the future Dark Worlds would entail. For quite some time, this discussion has focused on Chapter 4, however, since the trailer has released, most people have now generally agreed that it will take place at the church, because, of course it will. Look at all that stained glass, the giant towers, whatever this thing is. If that's not the church, I don't know what is. And with that new knowledge, we can begin to take another look at our other Dark World candidates. Ask ourselves if there's any evidence that could point us in a specific direction, or if it just makes narrative sense for the story to go in a specific way. And using this methodology, I am now more confident than ever in a Flower King Dark World, almost more than any other. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining to you why that is. And hey, if you like it, you can always subscribe, like, or comment to let me know. The support really helps a lot. So let's start with the basics, shall we? What made Flower King worth looking into in the first place, huh? Well, for starters, it's where Asgore lives and works, and not only is Asgore our main character's father, already giving him more importance than most, but he's also the dreamer most connected to the holidays, the other main family of the game, as well as some of the game's biggest mysteries, such as why Des went missing. He also has some pretty great potential interactions with our main characters. He's Chris's father, of course, but given what's been hinted about Susie's home life, I think Asgore's living situation could resonate with her in an interesting way. And while there are some obvious reasons that Asgore and Ralsei interactions could be intriguing, I think the fact that Asgore is the Flower King, which could potentially translate over into the Dark World as well, also provides an interesting avenue to explore, giving their shared royalty. Not only that, but with Toriel appearing in Chapter 3's Dark World, it seems unlikely that Toby would exclude Asgore as her counterpart, especially since he's been so clearly set up for a character arc about letting go of the past, as he's still pursuing Toriel romantically and has the flowers he gave her on their wedding day and a photo of that day pinned on his fridge. Not to mention, the game has already drawn parallels to him in The Beast from Beauty and the Beast twice at this point, a story that heavily involves living objects, which is extremely relevant to Deltarune and Dark Worlds. Asgore has also received some updates in Deltarune that also highlight this possibility. For one, he talks noticeably faster than he does in Undertale, a change that would make sense if he was going to get more screen time in this game. He also has two unused sprites currently in the files. One is a sad sprite, not much to say there, Asgore has plenty of reasons to be sad, but another is an angry sprite, which is strange, because the only time we've actually seen Asgore get anywhere near angry is when you one-shot him in the no mercy route. But you know what would make Asgore angry? Chris's safety being put at risk. And something like that really makes the most sense to happen in a Dark World. Okay, so it makes sense that Asgore would appear in a Dark World, but why Flower King specifically? Couldn't he appear in one of the others? Well, maybe, but the thing is, the location itself has quite a bit of proof as well. For one, and I'm not the first to point out how suspicious this is, the soul-colored flowers, the conspicuous double doors in the back, the vines growing around it, and the striking color scheme of it all, it's practically begging to be made into a Dark World, but there is more to it than simply aesthetics. For one, while I think most people know about the double doors I mentioned, did you know that there's actually another door at the back of Flower King? One that was added in Chapter 2. That's right, in Chapter 2, a looks at standing outside of Flower King as it's closed, which itself is kind of suspicious if I'm being honest, and mentions that the door around the back of the building is unlocked, but they don't think they should go in there. And checking the side of the building confirms that there is indeed a door there, though it's apparently blocked by flowers. Now, there's honestly quite a bit to unpack with this. For one, the fact that the door was only added in Chapter 2 and Toby added a whole NPC to draw attention to it makes it feel like this is pretty important. Honestly, the only other change between chapters I can really compare this to is the change of the computer lab door to a single door to a double door, and we all know how that one turned out. The door is also mentioned as being unlocked, which means it should be no problem to enter if a Dark World is created in the shop. It is apparently blocked by flowers, but that feels like a pretty weak obstacle, so much so that the Luke's doesn't even mention it. There's also the chance that this door is the other side of the door in Asgore's room. This wouldn't make a lot of physical sense, but if you compare the inside of Toriel's house to the outside of it, I think you'll see that how much that matters is quite questionable. Okay, Future Atlas here. I'm adding this way after the fact, because not only did I realize the Luke's confirmed the back door to be the other side of the one inside editing, but after editing, I had a bit of a realization regarding the implications of this discovery, and I think they're large enough to be worth the addition in this video. Okay, so first and foremost, this does confirm that the back door is a double door, as we have already seen it inside. That's good for obvious reasons, but I don't think it's nearly as big as the other meaning that can be gleaned from this information. You see, part of this theory involves speculation on the purpose of the addition of this door, as it of course assumes that it is there for the sake of the Dark World. However, without this dialogue, it is technically possible that it could have been for something like a secret Light World room. Think something like Santa's workshop that we could have seen later on, maybe even as completely optional content. However, since we know that the only thing behind this door is Asgore's room, we can rule out that option as a reason for the addition. We can also rule out the possibility that it is simply meant as another way in, as there would be very little reason for that since we can just go in the other way. So the question is, if it's not there to provide access to another room, why is it there? In fact, with the narration implying there isn't anything of note behind the shop aside from the door, it also begs the question of why there are doors in that room in the first place. And as far as I'm aware, the only possibility I can think of is that these doors will indeed be used to enter a Dark World. You may argue that this wouldn't be necessary since we'd go in through the front, however, A, that isn't a double door, and B, it is very possible that the beginning area is meant to be his room, just like how we start on a representation of the couch in Chapter 3. Toby may need us to start there, hence why the doors have been there since the very beginning. It also allows the shop to be closed, preventing random civilians from realistically walking in, but allowing a way for someone like, say, his child, to enter. Anyway, yeah, I really can't think of any other explanation for this that makes sense. This has really just confirmed Flower King as a Dark World for me even further, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Anyway, I'll let Past Me take over again. Thanks. There's also some unused flavor text in Asgore's shop for the arrangement of flowers he typically stands in front of, implying at some point we will get to go in there again, and for some reason Asgore will not be standing there to block it. Toby also made a strange tweet back in 2020 to help advertise some merch known as the Full Rouse shirt, in which he says, "He's always getting mixed up with flowers, isn't he?" That hasn't happened. Not that doesn't happen, that hasn't happened. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, that's cool and all, but Dark Worlds need a theme of escapism, and Flower King doesn't really have a strong candidate that fits with the rest. And that's where you'd be wrong. Flower King does have a theme that has already been set up. Comics and manga. Both of which Toby considers to fall under the label of comics, by the way. The most obvious evidence for this is the comics on Asgore's TV, but more than that, Alphys has talked about showing Asgore comics and manga/anime multiple times in Deltarune, even going so far as to compare him to a superhero directly. That isn't all though. In the Alarm Clock app dialogue, Asgore references superheroes twice, comparing Santa to one right after he says he wants to be and thinks he would make a good Santa, where the word super is even highlighted with quotes, and when Undyne mentions that they made a super tree by combining a bunch together, where Asgore repeats the word super tree for seemingly very little reason other to highlight his connection to this word. Plus, just look at Asgore's design in Undertale. The cape and the emblem on the center of his chest, the fact that he's super buff, he's really just a few steps away from looking like a superhero himself. Of course, most Dark Worlds have a secondary Lightner joining the adventure, and if it wasn't obvious by now, I think, in this case, it will be Alphys. Not only does she fit the theme of the Dark World, so much so that adding her brings even more evidence for it, such as the buff superheroes hugging on her computer, but she also appears to be one of, if not Asgore's closest friend, as he has given her countless flowers, and the two seem to spend a considerable amount of time reading and discussing together. Plus, going back to what I mentioned earlier, it's likely that Undyne will appear in Chapter 3, and just like with Toriel, it feels right that Toby would include her counterpart as well, especially so if both are included in the same chapter. We even have this hedge animation from one of the newsletters that just so happens to represent these 4 specific characters. Alphys is also a character with some pretty heavy ties to Flowey in Undertale, being his creator, so having her in a Dark World that would likely feature a Flowey parallel could result in some pretty interesting stuff. Going back to the newsletter, 2 of the spring newsletters we've gotten have featured a Sakura tree, relevant here due to its nature as a plant connecting to Flower King and its heavy association with manga. But what's really interesting here is that the sprite was updated between newsletters, something that doesn't seem super necessary if it was just made for them as a one-off thing. There's some interesting content from the dad string to keep in mind as well, as in the beginning, Toby says he was thinking carefully about dads when he made Deltarune, which I'd argue add to Asgore's potential importance. Toby also brings up Flower King itself in the hometown portion of the chapter, asking what the deal with it is, and quite interestingly, pointing out these glass displays as freezers, which given what we've seen of the hometown portion of Chapter 4, could work if Noelle joins us in Chapter 5. Speaking of Chapter 5, one of the teasers we've been given for it features a wreath that will be placed on Town Hall. And notably, this wreath contains flowers. Not just any flowers either, seemingly golden flowers, which are Asgore's specialty. Also, let's be real, if any one character needs a dark world, it's Asgore, and I mean that literally. The guy is actually going to be homeless if something doesn't change. And tell me, do you really think Toby would do something as mean-spirited as leaving his character there? Because I sure don't. I also think it just makes sense for Chapter 5. Chapter 5 could very easily be our last normal chapter, with Chapter 6 likely being the bunker, and Chapter 7 the roaring. I've seen people bring up the possibility of Ices or the festival, but those don't particularly connect with me, as Icy could appear at pretty much every dark world, so I don't think it needs its own, and the festival is outside, so I don't even know if a dark world could be made there. Plus, it's the type of thing that probably needs a couple days to be set up anyway. The hospital and the holiday house are locations I can understand a bit more, but the hospital doesn't really have much evidence to back it up, and there's technically a chance we get Rudy in Chapter 4. And when it comes to the holiday house, I'm not so sure Toby would pull the whole dark world gets created overnight at a sleepover thing again, especially right off the tail of what is likely another Noelle-heavy dark world in Chapter 4. I could also see the mayor getting her time in the spotlight in 6 or 7 as well, so it doesn't feel quite as necessary as Flower King does. So I think I've made my point here. Not only does Flower King have a lot of evidence, some of which is pretty heavy-hitting in my opinion. I'm looking at you, Mysterious Backdoor. But it also feels pretty necessary that Asgore gets some kind of major focus, arguably more than any other character that isn't playable or Des. If Asgore is connected to some of the biggest mysteries in the game, which it seemed like he is, it'd be weird if he was just vaguely mentioned and never showed up. I mean, hell, the Center Titan bears a striking resemblance to him, with pauldrons, horns, a crown, and maybe even a cloak. And his unused special attack involves him basically doing what you do to create a dark world while roaring. Yes, Toby actually used the word roaring to describe it. And finally, if that wasn't enough to convince you, I have one more thing that implies this has been set up for years. At the end of the pacifist route, it is Asgore that asks Alphys what an anime is, and he says it sounds neato. That line could have easily been done with Toriel. All I'm saying is, the payoff will be huge when we see a gun sword in Chapter 5. Anyway, I'll leave it off there. If you liked the video, remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget, drink water, remember to floss, and always remember, the impossible is possible. All you gotta do is make it so. Good night.